Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbaugh. Before we get into today's show, I want to tell you about a new offering we have here at Book of the Day. We have now launched Book of the Day Plus, which is a new way to support our work here at NPR. When you sign up, you get access to a special feed where you can listen to our new episodes sponsor-free. Nothing is changing about our regular show, but Book of the Day Plus is another way to help us keep giving you the books coverage you love. So please do sign up. We really appreciate it. You can find out more at plus.npr.org/bookoftheday. All right, on to today's show. You know, I just recently watched that movie, The Iron Claw, about the real-life Von Erich wrestling family, and a central theme of the movie is how tragedy can follow a family around. And it's a theme shared by the two books we've got for you today. In a bit, we'll talk about how cancer worked its way through one family. But first, Michelle Horton's sister, Nicole Armando, shot and killed her own husband. She was sentenced to a long stint in prison, and the legal system did not take into account the wealth of evidence that Nicole's husband had been abusive to her. The book is called Dear Sister, and it's about Michelle's efforts to reduce her sister's prison sentence while also holding the entire family, including her sister's kids, together through all of this. She spoke with Here and Now's Robin Young about how validating it all felt when someone in the legal system actually listened to them. That's ahead.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Live Right, publishers of White Poverty, How Exposing Myths About Race and Class Can Reconstruct American Democracy. Reverend William Barber and Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove envision how to unite millions of impoverished Americans. White Poverty, available now.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Mint Mobile. From the gas pump to the grocery store, inflation is everywhere. So Mint Mobile is offering premium wireless starting at just $15 a month. To get your new phone plan for just $15, go to mintmobile.com/switch.
Michelle Horton's first book is enraging, heartbreaking, and ultimately redemptive. Michelle had just ended a destructive marriage with a heroin-addicted husband, becoming a single mom to 8-year-old Noah, when there was a knock on her door in upstate New York. It was the police, saying she had to pick up her sister Nikki's 2- and 4-year-old kids. And then Michelle learned her sister had shot and killed their father, fearing he'd live up to his promise to kill her whether or not she left him. Michelle'd go on to learn her sister had been violently abused in videos her partner posted online for paying customers. People in town talked about Nikki's bruises. Why didn't Michelle see them? The courts did see them, but a judge sentenced Nikki to prison. And suddenly Michelle was raising 3 kids while fighting to free Nikki. Her memoir is Dear Sister, which is how they'd address each other in letters from prison. Michelle Horton, what a book.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Set the scene for us. When you were realizing how dangerous your own marriage was becoming, it was Nikki who told you had to leave for the sake of your child. Later, you realized maybe she was also talking to herself. Her partner, a popular gymnastic coach. Your son, Noah, loved him. You did notice bruises, but what?
There was always an excuse, and I think I didn't want to see on some level, and I also didn't have the imagination to fathom what was actually happening.
But also, you write, in your family, there was a healthy sense of denial about things because of what the adults in your family had also been through. Your mom had been raped by a boyfriend and was surrounded by a culture of don't tell. Nikki, when she was little, had been abused by a neighbor. Nikki tried to tell your mom something was wrong, but your mom told her about the little boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, I mean, denial and avoidance, it was a coping strategy, except it doesn't work in the long run.
Right. Nikki's got these bruises. Child services paid a visit because someone reported the bruises, and 24 hours later, her partner was dead. Now, abusers can get more violent when authorities show up. Nikki later said that's what happened. She had to protect herself. But when police knock on your door and only tell you and your mom pick up the kids, you think they've taken Nikki to protect her?
My first instinct when police are at my door is, that must be it. This will blow over. It's fine. I go to work. I get a text from my mom that just says homicide. And my whole reality flipped upside down because there's, my sister is the most maternal, kind, was a preschool teacher, hated guns, how did this happen?
Well, you're buffeted by that, and suddenly you meet this Greek chorus of women. Elizabeth, Nikki's son's music teacher, Sarah, Nikki's therapist, there's Jen, there's Wendy. Now, what we're going to be discussing now might be difficult for people to hear, so a warning there. It sure was tough for you. Tell us what they told you they knew was happening.
Her therapist had known for years. The therapist got police involved because it reached a point where she was being tortured and it was being filmed and put on porn sites without her consent and at first without her knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, Lori, the landlord, saw signs of rope burns around her neck. And you also find out a police officer was monitoring the videos that were playing on this porn website. He wanted to arrest her partner. Nikki just froze, couldn't do it. The cop later took it on himself to file an alert with the department, and you found out that they could then and there, just on the evidence, have arrested him.
Yes, and he also brought the evidence to the district attorney's office, and from what I understand, the common response was, well, if Nikki isn't going to report, there's nothing we can do, which is actually not true. Yeah. They could have pursued an evidence-based prosecution.
Yeah, I mean, the things that there was evidence were happening to her are repulsive. Her midwife talks about how, again, this is very difficult, her genitals were mutilated.
And it wasn't about sex. They were all punishments for her behaving in a way that he didn't agree with.
Yeah. Well, so you're thinking the legal aspect of this should be fine. Meanwhile, you eventually have to give up your job because you're now raising her two magical little children, Ben and Faye, and your own Noah. What are some of the things that you suddenly have to navigate when there's a killing in the family?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so much. You know, you're left with a crime scene that is up to you to get rid of everything, like everything. As the victim, you get assistance. We were not considered the victim. Mm-hmm. We were the perpetrator's family. And dealing with family court, getting custody, continuing to keep the kids in their routines. Who do we hire? And then also having to deal with the prosecution, realizing that these are not our friends. It's a very dangerous situation.
Many of the most compelling witnesses on Nikki's behalf weren't called to testify. This was spreading like wildfire through town, people who supported her.
Yeah. And, you know, we live in a country where 3 women are killed every day. So there's this sense of people talking. It's what do we do?
Yeah. While this community continued to rally, at one point, the prosecutor's side asks, well, if a woman's being abused, why wouldn't she just figure out how not to trigger her abuser? That was actually asked in court.
I felt like we had stepped back in time. I'm thinking I can't believe it's like this day and age, and these kinds of questions are still being asked by professionals in a courtroom.
Yeah. Well, also, New York had just passed the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, DVSJA, which allows a judge to resentence a domestic violence survivor who suffered abuse that contributed to their conviction. This was Nikki, but the judge in her case chose not to apply this, and in his remarks, he essentially said he didn't believe her. She gets 19 years to life.
It was one of the most demoralizing. It just felt like all the air in the world was sucked out. The DVSJA took 10 years to pass in New York. It's a very common issue that survivors who fight back are then punished. And the judge had discretion, and he decided not to use it. And by doing that, put other survivors in the state at jeopardy of the law not working for them. It was just like a double, triple whammy of utter disappointment.
Yeah. Well, you're heartsick. The kids. When you asked Ben, you know, what do you want on your Christmas list? Top of the list is Mom, and he's very confident. Santa will take care of this. And Faye puts on her best dress for her jail visits. Just what's going on, not just with your niece and nephew, but with your own son.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I really wanted to tell my story is to shine a light on what happens to kids. Women's prisons are filled with mothers. It's just so heartbreaking. And that love never dissipated. It never wavered, ever.
It was the thread, what's the children's book you cite?
The Invisible String.
The invisible string between their hearts.
Yeah.
Which Ben would talk about, a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And then this case goes to an appellate court.
We ended up getting this incredible appellate attorney pro bono. The appellate court decided that she should have been sentenced under the DVSJA, that her evidence and her testimony were more than enough to definitively say she was a victim of abuse. And they resentenced her to 7.5 years, down from 19 years to life.
Right. They also absolutely was scathing towards the Judge McLaughlin, who'd been the sitting judge in the first case. They wrote, the county court's decision was based on an arcane belief that the defendant could have avoided the murder by withdrawing from her apartment, antiquated impressions of how domestic violence survivors should behave.
It was so validating.
Yeah.
We all felt like we were in the twilight zone. So finally, someone in the system said, yo, you're not crazy. She actually is a victim. And to Nikki, it meant everything that finally she was believed.
Yeah. And she's free now.
She's free now. She was released on January 4th.
How's she doing? How are the kids?
Oh, everybody is so happy. I mean, obviously, Nikki has so much healing, but the fact we can all live together and the kids have her at school drop-off, and Ben is a theater kid and got to have his mom in the audience for his play recently, and we can finally show the kids that good things are possible.
And what about your Noah? Because there's one moment he gave up so much, including his bedroom, and you have no income. But at one point, Noah tells you that taking in his cousins was the right decision for you to make as a human, as a sister, but not the right decision as a mother.
Yeah. He felt like he was kind of left in the dust, and he wasn't wrong.
Well, but all I can think of is you both, you and your sister, raised such incredible kids who say the most astonishing things because they're allowed to.
Exactly right.
Yeah. You rushed to point out all along, it's not uncommon. Hers maybe got more attention towards the end because she's white and young. And
Yes.
What's the one thing that you learned through this process you'd want to communicate?
Oh, I mean, that the tactics that an abuser uses are the exact tactics that are used in correctional facilities and courtrooms. Isolation, intimidation, degradation, listening to their phone calls.
Yeah. Can you just talk briefly about the people, men and women, who put on purple shirts, the sign of domestic violence, came to protest, who had signs?
Right from the beginning, they are the people who gave us hope that Nikki would be believed, that eventually attracted the appellate attorney, that eventually got to the appellate division. I mean, without that support, dropping a meal off, they don't have to completely change their life to help, yet it completely changed ours.
That's Michelle Horton. Her book is Dear Sister, a memoir of secret survival and unbreakable bonds. Michelle, thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
This message comes from NPR sponsor BetterHelp. When life is flying by, it's important to take a moment to hit pause, set intentions, and reset. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor BritBox, streaming a new season of the original crime thriller Blue Lights, a harrowing, nuanced portrayal of policing in the turbulent streets of modern Belfast. Blue Lights, streaming at BritBox.com/NPR.
Sometimes there is no answer as to why tragedy happens, but sometimes there is. Lawrence Ingrassia is a journalist whose family was absolutely racked with cancer, and he dug into the research behind the hereditary nature of cancer. He talked to NPR's Scott Simon about his book, A Fatal Inheritance, and what kept him looking for answers. Here's Scott.
It may be hard to imagine a family in America that hasn't been wounded by cancer. The losses in Lawrence Ingrassia's family have been extraordinary. His mother, Regina, died breast cancer when she was 42. Larry was 15. His sister, Angela, died about a decade later of abdominal cancer at the age of 24. And his nephew, Charlie, got cancer in his cheek when he was just 2. His sister, Gina, was lost to lung cancer when she was 32, and his brother, Paul, also then working for the Wall Street Journal, had to contend with several different cancers for more than 20 years. The loss, pain, and incomprehension sent Larry Ingrassia on a search to try to find some scientific thread through these unfathomable losses. His new book is A Fatal Inheritance: How a Family Misfortune Revealed a Deadly Medical Mystery. And Lawrence Ingrassia, former managing editor of the Los Angeles Times and deputy managing editor of the New York Times as well, joins us from New York. Larry, thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Scott.
You know, when I read your memoir, I had to contend with the fact that I've known many people who've died of cancer. I've done obituaries for many people who've died of cancer. I'm not sure I really know what cancer is. Do we really know what it is and what causes it?
You know, that's a great question. If you go back a half century, or a little bit more to the 1960s, cancer was very, very deadly back then. Don't get me wrong, it still is a terrible killer. But there's been a lot of progress, particularly with some kinds of cancer. Now so much has been learned about cancer. And I learned in this journey of discovery that I went on that two of the main pioneers, two young doctors at the National Cancer Institute, who stumbled across a family like mine that had a lot of cancers, all different kinds of cancers, all different ages. They were determined to figure out what was going on. Now, it took them a long time, more than 20 years, but they did. And, I consider them two heroes, Fred Lee and Joe Fraumini.
What did Frederick Lee and Joseph Fraumini develop, uncover, discover, establish that had been missing?
Around the time my mother was ill, this is in the late 60s, they came across this family. Initially, there was a father who was 23 years old who had leukemia and a 10-month-old son who had a soft tissue cancer in his arm called a rhabdomyosarcoma. Both of these are pretty unusual for those ages, but the combination of that in a father and son the odds against that were astronomical. And as they started looking at this family, they said, you know what, the pattern here seems, maybe there is something hereditary going on there. So it took more than 20 years, and a lot of other pioneers joined in the search for the genetic cause of cancer. And lo and behold, in late 1990, they discovered a mutation and a gene that turns out to be hugely important. It's called P53. It's a cancer suppressor gene. So we all have cells that are constantly mutating. But the good thing that we have is that we have cancer suppressor genes. BRCA, the breast cancer gene, is probably the best known. But P53, it is a kind of on a search and destroy mission. This gene will find potentially cancerous cells anywhere in the body and will kill or repair potentially cancerous cells from becoming malignant. That's great, except if you're born with the mutation in P53. And that was the miracle moment. And this opened up not just an understanding of hereditary cancer, but broadly of, how cancer can be caused when you have mutations in cancer suppressor genes. That's one of the things. So this really was a huge moment. I didn't realize it. It turns out the New York Times ran a 2-column story at the top of page 1. The Wall Street Journal ran a 4-column story. That's where my brother and I were working. Somehow we missed it. Again, that was because we were thinking it's something having to do with all the chemicals that our father was taking home.
Because your father worked as a scientist.
Yes. But you really have to give credit for Lee and Fraumini for persisting, for being determined, for showing a dedication, even though there was a lot of skepticism early on about their research.
I've got to ask, what was it like to do this book?
Scott, it was painful, but also I would have to say it was rewarding. My brother and I were always close, especially because we were the only ones left, and he died a few years ago. But I knew a lot about my sisters and their cancers, but I learned so much more as part of this journey of discovery that I went on. For example, my sister, her husband, shared with me the diary that she had kept from the moment she learned that she had cancer, and it was painful to read. This was back in the 80s when there was a lot of belief that just positive thinking, could cure whatever ailed you, right? And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, Gina, you had this deadly mutation. There was nothing that you could have done. I was thinking back, my mother being ill all those years and dying at 42 with 4 young children. And, as a parent, you want to see your children grow up. Oh my God, how hard. As hard as being ill was for her, how hard that must have been that she was not going to have that life with her children. And so kind of for me, looking back, we're here and we're gone. And while we're here, make the most of those connections that you have with people. That's what everybody's going to remember.
After all you've learned, what you've discovered, and I ask this question with respect for scientists and researchers, can science be so certain about one thing it overlooks others?
Yes. But the good news is that there are always scientists out there, always pioneers out there who are searching for answers and who say maybe what we think we know is not the whole truth. We know so much more than we used to know, but there's still so much more to learn. For example, why did my nephew get his first cancer at age 2, and my brother didn't get his first cancer until age 46? And they're different cancers.
I've got to ask this. How are you?
I am at peace. I am sad to have lost my family. I am very fortunate. I tested negative for the mutation. There's a 50-50 chance that you will inherit the mutation. I tested negative, which means that I can't pass it on to my children, which means that it can't be passed on to my grandchildren. I have 2 children and 6 grandchildren. And, Scott, there has been a lot of pain in my life, but I know that in a lot of people's lives, there's a lot of pain. And I think my brother and I tried to focus on also how blessed we were, having these wonderful experiences and careers working for these great news organizations, having wonderful families. Even with all the cancers, I think we can look back and say, life in many ways has been good to us. Thank you. Thank you.
Lawrence Ingrassia, his new book, A Fatal Inheritance, How a Family Misfortune Revealed a Deadly Medical Mystery. Larry, thanks so much for joining us.
Scott, I really hope that this will help families like mine. This is a love story to my family, but it's a love story to all those families.
And that's it for this week on NPR's Book of the Day. Let us know what you think. You can write to us at bookoftheday@npr.org. I'm Andrew Limbong. The podcast is produced by Isabella Gomez-Sarmiento and edited by Megan Sullivan. Our founding editor is Petra Mayer. The show elements for this week were produced and edited by Vincent Acquavino, Ashley Brown, Shannon Rhodes, Andrew Craig, Emiko Tamagawa, Todd Muntz, Erica Ryan, Courtney Dorning, Fernando Navarro-Roman, and Ed McNulty. Beth Donovan is our managing editor. Thanks for listening.
I'm Rachel Martin. After hosting Morning Edition for years, I know that the news can wear you down. So we made a new podcast called Wild Card, where a special deck of cards and a whole bunch of fascinating guests help us sort out what makes life meaningful. It's part game show, part existential deep dive, and it is seriously fun. Join me on Wild Card, wherever you get your podcasts, only from NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, the Capital One Venture Card. Earn unlimited 2x miles on every purchase. Plus, earn unlimited 5x miles on hotels and rental cars booked through Capital One Travel. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details. This message comes from NPR sponsor Mint Mobile. From the gas pump to the grocery store, inflation is everywhere. So Mint Mobile is offering premium wireless starting at just $15 a month. To get your new phone plan for just $15, go to mintmobile.com/switch.